What's up, everyone? Welcome to Teenz Media TV. So, this is a place where we bring people who's faced the same struggles as you to come and bring us the stories and how they've made it in life, and entrepreneurs who've struggled like you, the people who's going to be watching this video are struggling currently. So, the main purpose of this podcast is to actually equip you and teach you some basic skills that you can actually use in your daily life. And yes, as for me, I'm Jean Chitenga, and you're watching on Teenz Media TV. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, ask the guest of the day to introduce himself. If you may, please do so for me, sir.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, thanks.
Greetings to all your guests, and thank you for having me. I was quite interested that you invited me. I'm not sure I'm the best person often to speak on things, but I'll share my story. My name is Wayne Alexander. I'm presently working for an organization called the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, which is a political NGO, and that's another story. But a bit more about myself. I'm on the cusp of being 49, 50. I've had a journey in life, which has led me now to largely working as a political consultant, and through the many iterations of work and things that I've done, has led me to where I am. I have two daughters, a wife, live in the southern suburbs in Rosebank, Cape Town. I don't know what else I can tell you about me with that.
Yeah, so I saw like you started off well, and I feel like you've answered one of the questions, but you didn't answer fully. So therefore, I didn't like to ask you, like, do you maybe mind just giving us, like, a brief background on the career choices you went into? Because you just mentioned a few things. You mentioned that you're a political consultant, but maybe you didn't go deeper. Maybe the viewers, and myself would actually like to know maybe where you studied, how many years, and how long it took you to actually complete your career.
To get where I am. So the funny story is I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing. So my trajectory as a young person was, and when I tell my origination story, there were two things I wanted to do. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to change the world. So when I was in high school back in 1991, 1992, the big idea for me was, because I was very vocal on political issues and issues of the country, was for me to become a civil servant, and in particular go into the foreign services as a cadet. And then, so the idea was I'd go work in embassies, and that was my big dream. And I remember writing a letter to Foreign Affairs back then. Back then there was no emails. Wrote a letter, got a pamphlet back of what was required. And part of that was, okay, you'd have to study, you have a political degree first, and then you'd go into your cadetship, and then after a while you'll get posted in help people get their visas. And that was the work that I intended for my own journey. And the reason was because I wanted two things. I wanted to change the world, and I wanted to travel. And that was the idea that I stumbled upon as a job. And so that was what I wanted to do. So eventually I got to the point where I was at varsity, studying politics at now UKZN, then University of Natal, Durban. And then life happened. And as I tell my kids today, the job you will eventually do may not have been created yet. But it was the beauty of starting the journey that's led me to where I am. So if I look at my career broadly, at varsity I started doing work around relief and working while still at varsity, and a student in an NGO called Remember and Give, and I was doing ECD work. Alongside that, I was doing lots of volunteer work, lots of political work. I was the chairperson of the KZN Youth Council back then, which was largely a political formation of youth organizations. So I was very active. So by the time I was ready to graduate or move on, my first job wasn't necessarily what I thought it would be. I ended up working in the area. So being very political, I had a job within a political party for a short period of time.
And if I may ask, what political party was this?
It was then the Democratic Party.
Okay.
And I was the youth coordinator, national youth coordinator chair. And that was just before 2000. Then I worked at the AIDS conference, 2000 AIDS conference, as a very young, I was 2021. And I coordinated the cultural program of the AIDS conference, which was then became known for Nkosi Johnson speaking at the opening ceremony. And Mbeki making very controversial statements. And you can go back and look at, but I coordinated the opening and closing ceremonies and all the cultural events in between. And a lot of the projects we started and done back then still continue. So, for example, if you go to Durban, there's a big red ribbon in the Central Park. And that was one of the projects that we had done, we had created. So there's a lot of stuff. But my journey was all over the place. I was doing lots of stuff. So I started out in doing community development, then ended up in the HIV/AIDS sector and became a specialist around communication and strategic communication, and using communication to change people's behavior. So the journey then went on. There's some major TV products that we put out. I ended up in the Netherlands for a period as well, working and living there and managing projects back in Africa. I think I was the African coordinator for a project called Dance for Life. So, yeah, how I eventually ended up here, and this is the backstory to why I'm with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. When I was in my 18, 19 and involved in politics, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation was helping the Democratic Party around its training and development of young leaders. And I was one of those young people that benefited. So I attended courses. I also went to Germany. But for a long period, I was away from politics. And then, my late 30s, I was transitioning out, having a career change again. And I applied for this job to head up the Liberal Workshop in Cape Town. So happened, then met somebody I knew who was the program officer before, and then took up the job. So this has been my longest stint in terms of work and profession. But my experience and my journey professionally has been in a number of fields with a number of skill sets. And the big story of that is that in all of those spaces, I've used that to travel the world and to make a difference. And that's my motivation in terms of where I am and what I do.
Okay, interesting. You've actually answered quite a bit questions. I mean, you've covered, I think, most of the things I wanted to hear from you. But otherwise, I don't think we're done yet because I feel like we still have more to hear from you. And yeah, now I would like to ask you, what was your expectations and what was the expectations? And from those expectations, what outcomes did you get from them? I don't know if you get what I mean, because, we set expectations and maybe this is the type of thing we want, but then sometimes that is not the outcome, because I think you mentioned it earlier on, no, you wanted to do something else, but then you ended up where you are now as a political consultant. And so now, expectations and outcomes. So
as a young person, if I go back to my younger self, the reason that I pushed so hard was that I wanted to escape my situation. I wanted to go to grow up in, when you're there, you don't think it's that bad, but you do know that that's not what you want for the rest of your life. And so studying academia and being successful in whatever I'd done was my journey to get out of where I was. I mean, a large part of my high school career, my mother was an alcoholic in a bad way. She was living a very difficult life. They were going through a very bad patch in their lives and a bad transition. I mean, I remember going to my awards day where I was head boy at my school, receiving great prizes, and my mother was absolutely drunk. and then embarrassing it. And my journey was I needed to succeed to get out. I had a plan and I worked hard at it, but that didn't materialize. And if I look back at it, if I had only stuck to my plan and didn't trust, if you believe in God, the journey that God was destining me for, I wouldn't have come so far. So what I had planned was far less than what life has given me. And so to come back to your question, there was an expectation and there was a journey plot, but that, the horizon is the top of the road. So you can only see so far. And at that stage, I thought I'd be stuck on this date idea because if you went into the foreign services, there were all these benefits, but you sit in a consulate, in a work from 9 to 3, in a foreign country, doing very little that's necessarily influential. And maybe you progress eventually. And there's stability and you can have a family and all of that, but you're not making fundamental changes other than making sure people get their visa or their... So my dream was big for me at that particular moment. Mm. But we have gone by, doing the work that I've done, using what I have to achieve what I wanted. I've gone further than I expected.
Okay, awesome. So now you also mentioned now something that actually just triggered my mind now, if I may call it. You mentioned something about, helping people getting visas. So now, if I may ask, is there maybe like a possibility now that you are actually helping people getting visas and maybe like helping them travel? And is it just only like, because I feel like, is it just African people or is it like anyone? Because I don't really think like Europeans really need, visas to move from one place to the other, as long as I think they have the European, is it called passport or visa? I don't know. So like, is it Africans that you help get the visas and like...
So that was that was my trajectory, what I thought I would do. At present in the work that I do allow or work with politicians who I send overseas, but I'm not in the space where I'm working with people who are refugees or anything of that nature. Okay. I may know somebody who works at Home Affairs, but even that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to help anybody. But I mean, so in terms of the work I do, when I say, if you become a cadet within the foreign services, they place you, let's say, in Burundi for 3 years. You have a 3-year cycle of moving. And that was my plan. So that was why I wanted that job, because I wanted to travel. That was why I wanted to see the world and I wanted to have some impact on the world. And I thought, okay, if I go do this job every 3 years, I'm destined to move to another country. Okay,
smart. That's very
that was my 17, 16-year-old self thinking, okay, I have to travel. That's the thing. And my parents couldn't afford it. And if I took a normal job, which, my other people in my community were a doctor, teacher, maybe a lawyer, travel wasn't certain. So that's why I wanted to do that. The outcome of that was I didn't actually do that. But what I did do, my first trip overseas was at 18, paid for by somebody else. And so, at some stage, I think in my 30s, I counted, I had seen 37 countries.
First trip to you were overseas, you were 18, but then you didn't mention which country you were in.
So I'm South African.
But I mean, like, which country you traveled?
Germany.
Okay, so the first time you were in Germany, you were 18. Okay.
And the story behind that I was working in a particular organization called Durban Youth Interaction Committee. Mm-hmm. And we used to do development projects, unity projects. We were part of that movement around being priests in our land, doing intercultural work. And a group from Germany, the Lower Bavaria, came to visit us. And we hosted them for a day and a half. And then when there was the return trip, the company in South Africa, or the department that was hosting that group, asked us if we didn't want to come along. So 3 of us from our organization went on that trip for 2.5 weeks to Germany. living with host families. And at that stage, my parents couldn't afford it. I remember they said the minimum requirement in terms of taking pocket money with you was 200 Rand. And I had to ask my aunts, uncles to help me put the money together. The problem with that was that they would give 5, 10 Rand. But when you flew back, they were all expecting gifts. And the sort of odd thing was that the exchange rate wasn't that bad back then. It was 1 to 5, but 200 Rand wasn't a lot of money. As a young person who was 18, and then you got to socialize. So it was a bit of a juggle. But what I did get to do was travel overseas and see the world, and that was the first trip of many others.
Beautiful. So yeah, I've heard so many things, and maybe a word from me to young people is that you heard for yourself from the wise man. Challenges do come, but always stay strong, stay on your feet, and work towards your dream. But then to move on, I think you've mentioned 1 or 2 challenges. You said one, you struggled a lot to get the 200 Rand, and then the other challenge that I quoted from your speech earlier on was that you said something about your mom being a drunkard. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this. So then I'd also like to ask you, besides those 2 challenges, what were the other challenges that you faced along the way to, getting where you are today?
So I don't know what it is, but for us, in many regards, we were the first in our families to matriculate.
Ooh.
We were also the first in our families, for myself, first to go to university. So the support structure that you had around you didn't understand where you were going and what support you needed to go into those spaces. It had its advantages, which you guys don't necessarily have. The advantage was every time you came home, you were a hero. I remember I was in the newspaper, and a couple of years back, my aunties sent me copies of, they had cut it out and they had kept it for all these years. So your successes is your community successes.
Okay, at least.
They celebrated you, but they didn't understand where you were going and couldn't provide the support you needed. So then you've got to find people who are in those spaces who can guide and mentor you, who understand where you come from. And luckily for me, I did have some people that I could rely on and could say, okay, I remember my teacher in matric, our English teacher. I'd been appointed head boy. Unexpected, because I didn't come from a family where that would have happened, but had excelled enough to show my leadership ability. And she said to me, Wayne, you're going to go far, so I'm going to do a few things for you. She took me to a coffee shop and taught me how to drink coffee. But I'm not saying drink coffee, but how to behave.
When you're in a coffee shop.
When you're in a coffee shop. Because up until then, the best I would get was going to KFC, maybe Wimpy when we're driving. But, that was, you didn't have, so she provided the etiquette skills. She took me to theater for the first time and showed me, these are the customs and stuff. And it doesn't seem like a lot now. But back then, going into space, and let's say you go to university and then you're going to the theater and you don't know how to behave, or you don't know the etiquette, or just understanding. And for me, that was also allowed me to help my friends. So often I was going to spaces where we hadn't been allowed, because we were the first generation coming out of apartheid. Our parents, our matric ball was held at the Royal Hotel in Durban, which is a 5-star hotel then. Our parents were never allowed into those spaces. So going to the coffee shop in the Royal was a big thing. Or having your matric ball there was a huge thing for them. But you were the first. You were always breaking ground.
So basically, if I'm getting it right, you are one of those, generational curse breakers.
There is generational curse breakers, and that's part of it. But The other story was, because I wouldn't want to see apartheid as a curse. Because for me, generational curses are the things that you inherit from your family. But there were limitations even on your family. So you think about your father. Your father, or let's say I'll take my mother. My mother worked in retail. She was really good at retail. But she could never be a manager in a department or in a shop. She would train a white person. A white person would come in as an 18-year-old student or high school student and will eventually be a manager. So their worldview was limited. They could never fully actualize as human beings. While for me, I'm breaking ground, and you guys will go further. You will own companies. You will be CEOs, you will be directors, you will manage big teams. For them, there was a cap. This is where you operate. So their community became the power base. So we were venturing out of that thing. And even for them, that became a challenge. But we were venturing out. We didn't think that there were so many limitations. But we also had to go into those spaces and learn. So generally, I think, yes, maybe breaking generational curses in some aspects, but also just breaking ground in general.
Okay. Breaking ground is the proper term to use. So you broke grounds. So yeah, Ish, you've actually mentioned a lot, and I feel like you've enlightened me personally a lot more. I don't know about what our viewers is going to think, but I'm pretty sure they will be inspired falling onto this video and, having to hear your background story, because I believe this was something personal that you were comfortable to share, and I don't think you really hid anything from this. So grateful for this. And then I would also like to quickly ask you a question, because now I see that you work for this organization, FNF. So maybe if you could just enlighten us a little bit on what FNF is all about, what you do. I think you've mentioned a few things, but we didn't cover it all.
So I said we are a political NGO, German one in particular. And the backstory around FNF was in post-World War II. The Germans asked themselves, how did we reach the situation where we had a Hitler? And the answer was political education. There's not enough people who know enough about politics, so then they're easily misdirected to have followed a person like Hitler. So I think the first thing they done was they created these foundations for all the parties that got into the Bundestag, or their National Assembly, in the first election. Each party could have a foundation to do political education in country. But then that work was also extended because Germany needs to have stable democracies elsewhere to ensure that they are also safe. So the work we do is around strengthening democracy in South Africa, and that can take different forms, providing support around understanding policy, capacity building for civil society and politicians. So there's a lot of things that we could do, or that we focus on trying to do, to help South Africans have a strong democracy.
Okay. So now, I've actually come to understand that FNF actually works along. I don't know if it's a partner, or should I say it trains people from the DA party. So what exactly do you do with politicians from the DA party?
So as I said, we're a political NGO. There's 6 political foundations in South Africa from Germany.
Okay.
And each of us have a slightly different ideological leaning. We are connected to the Free Democrat Party in Germany. And our partner party in South Africa is the Democratic Alliance. Our work is divided into 2. We do some work with civil society and in the think tank space through our Joburg office. And this office does work with the Democratic Alliance. Okay. So to give you the context of how we come to that. Other foundations work with other parties and other organizations, but that becomes our focus. And so the work we do is helping them largely strengthen their capacity to generate new policy and have leaders who are strengthening democracy both in opposition and where they govern.
Okay. So, very interesting. I feel like I'm having more questions towards this, because I feel like I actually want to know more. So FNF, is it only in South Africa alone? First question. And then maybe the second one that you can maybe answer is, if maybe a person wants to like get FNF operating in another country in Africa, how can they get it to operate?
So we are, I think our reach is over 60 countries globally. We have a number of projects across the continent. So we've got a strong program in Zimbabwe around civil society, Tanzania, Kenya, and then we've got two offices in West Africa. We treat MENA as a different region. So it's sub-Saharan and MENA. So there's also offices in Tunisia and other places. But from our bases, we do touch a number. So we also got the African Liberal Network, which we support, and there's, I think, over 35 political parties and organizations in there. If you say you want to, largely that's driven by our ability to get funding and the sort of objectives of the organization at the moment. So if you want to, you can make connection with the foundation globally and look, there are some programs that are transcend borders. But in terms of setting up offices, that's largely dependent on, it's more like hubs. So for example, I have worked in places like Namibia. We've done work in Mozambique, depending on the need and program. So, yeah, I don't know if that helps answer the question, but I think...
So maybe to start one in a country like Congo, is that like almost impossible? Or?
I don't think we do have connection to organizations in the Congo.
The DRC Congo, not the Brazzaville.
Yeah. But I don't think we are at this stage. So, obviously the work, there's sensitivities and there's issues. There's political sensitivity. So we've got to make a full assessment before we're able to enter.
Okay, makes sense. True. I feel like I'm asking you a lot of questions now.
Go for it.
But I need to ask you these type of questions so that we can feed our viewers and we can enlighten people that is actually interested into these things, because other young people do want to go into these things, but they maybe do not have enough information on this, or some of them just look at the money, whereby there's actually a lot more into it. So maybe that is the reason why I actually...
So are these people want to get involved in politics?
Yes, people who want to get involved in politics. So I'm like, an example for me, I was having a chat with one of my mentors. I think I'm going to keep the name for now, anonymous. So I was having a chat with one of my mentors, and then I was like, no, I would actually like to go into politics personally. And then he was like, my boy, you really want to go into politics? I'm like, yeah. And then he was like, politics is not the easy place. I'm like, why? And then he was like, no, before you go into politics, you actually need to have the means. And when he meant having the means, he did not like mean, having the leadership abilities or anything like that. He meant you should actually have the financial means before you can actually move into the world of politics. Otherwise, you'll be driven away by money, and that's how like corruption comes in. And so you see, like with what I just mentioned now, like how like entering into politics, you should actually have money, or otherwise you'll be thrown away, and otherwise you'll be thrown away. And
can I ask you another question? Because I hear you.
Okay.
And I work a lot with young people who are in politics or want to go into politics.
Okay.
And I ask a very awkward question. I ask the question, why?
Why do you want to go into politics? Okay, good question. I'll answer. So, personally, I'm going to answer for me. Personally, I want to go into politics because I want to make a change. Especially...
Okay, I hear you. But why do you want to make a change?
I'm tired of seeing people struggle.
Okay. When was the moment you decided you want to
go into politics?
Because you're now giving me very generic answers. Everybody who comes into politics says, one, they're frustrated, they're unhappy with the situation. Two, they want to make a difference. And 3, they've decided that politics is the route that they can make the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the genetic story. So I'll tell you my backstory, just to give you an example of where my backstory goes. I started in politics very young, but not consciously. So the first time I discovered that my color skin is different, because I grew up my father was a pastor, and then part of his family were musicians. And so my uncle was dating a white woman who had white kids. And so it didn't make sense back then, but they lived in the periphery of town, and it didn't make sense. But so I grew up there was no consciousness of difference and change. So at 9 years old, I was in Durban, and there's paddling pools owned by the Newton family. You always see those pools there. They've now lost the tender to that place, but it had the lights, but there was also a paddling pool. And during the year, there was no sort of, if you go at certain times, you could go swim in the pool, because the colored beach was too far. So maybe just to explain even further and give you context, Addington Hospital was where colored people would get their healthcare from. It was on the beach. We shared that with white people. That was the only space in Durban where, because our community wasn't like Mitchell's Plain where you could build a hospital. So we would go there. When your mom wanted to take you to hospital, that's where you went. And then you couldn't swim in the beach in front there because that was a whites-only beach. But as a child, you don't know this. But so we would go to after the hospital, you go there, you go swim. We knew that, I think my parents knew they were progressive. But come December, that space became whites only. Because we would say the Valis or the Gauteng, but the Valis would come down. And Valis were mostly white people back then. So the beach in Durban looked different to the way it looked now. And so we went to the hospital. We went to go have a swim quickly afterwards. My mother was sitting with some Indian lady, and we went to go play in the pool, and we were doing our thing, and we were playing. And then a boy comes to me and he says to me, "No, my mother said you must get out of the pool. You don't belong here."
Sure.
I'm 9. You don't belong here. I'm like, no, it's nonsense. Then that boy goes and calls the lifeguard, who happens to be black. And in Durban, they wear orange, red trunks and the yellow shirt. I still remember, big guy. And he came and he took me out of the pool along with the other kid and took us to our parents and said they're not supposed to be. And I cried. As a child, I cried. To today, that the motions of being told you don't belong sits with me. So that's my origination story around why
you chose to go into the field.
Not why I chose to go into the field. What I wanted to address.
Okay.
I didn't ever want people to feel the pain I felt. That's why when I say my origination story or my purpose was, I just wanted the world to be better. I didn't want to be that. So whenever you ask me, Wayne, why are you doing what you're doing? I go back to that little boy. The trauma he felt, the unfairness he felt in that particular moment. And my mother couldn't tell me she couldn't comfort me or explain it, but all she could say was, because of your skin color. And that was my political awakening. Then I became aware of the news, what was happening, the ANC, what is apartheid. So by 12, I was very radical. But even at that stage, I wasn't intentional about my politics. But the issue was, what is the emotive, and that's what I say to young people, is what is the emotive issue? What is the story? Where does that genesis happen? And that takes work. I'm not saying you must do it now. Mm-hmm. But if you stick to that and constantly ask, you don't need money. You need to be connected to your true purpose. What are you trying to address? What is the genesis story of why you're doing this? Because believe you me, once you go into politics, what is fair or will change. So he's right that, not that you need money, but that you need to understand what you're trying to achieve. And every time I go back when I'm faced with a choice, am I answering the question? So, if you're living in America today, it's easy to be a Trump supporter now because he's now in power,
Yes.
or he's going into power. So then becomes, okay, so there's some benefits that you gain from them. So then, and politics is about stories. In America, and politicians push the idea of the binary. It's us or them, constantly. There's no gray. There's no gray. It's always, they constantly push the binaries. And you can get lost in those stories and lose yourself if you don't understand why you're doing this. Because you're constantly making a choice. And then sort of logically what happens is your instinct to survive or your instinct to benefit yourself becomes bigger than your purpose. So, for example, I don't know if you're getting what I'm saying.
Yeah,
your instinct is.
you.
So if then, for example, they say to you, they come and say, "Oh, you can be the mayor of Cape Town," and then you sometimes you'll be faced with a choice of, as mayor of Cape Town, what do I do? And so they say, "Well, just do this. This will benefit people, and you'll do it." But does it really benefit? Does it answer the question you want to do? And you find that you find that constantly with politicians that they make decisions or they do things, and in their mind and their world, they're doing good. And there's always a story of good around what they're doing. But how people experience it may be different.
So now you see, you touched on that. So this question came to mind. Very interesting question came to mind. I'm pretty sure you've heard of the teacher cut that is happening to the schools. The reason why I'm bringing this into this discussion is because you said, no, sometimes politicians make decisions thinking that, no, it's good, but to the population or to the people, it's not good at all. So now my question is, do you think what the DA did was right, or what the basic education of the Western Cape did was right by actually cutting off teachers? Because from what I've heard or from some of the news I've seen that there's something they say that most of the money that's supposed to go towards the education, it has now been put into LEAP program. Now LEAP program basically, I think it's to increase law enforcement, police, and so. Do you think that's a good decision taken? And also, do you think by doing this they actually care about the youth and the future of South Africa?
So it's the Michelangelo scenario. Trevor Noah speaks about that Michelangelo sculpture, where we're looking at the same thing, but we're looking at it from different angles. And it's a question of purpose. That's why I say you must be very grounded in your purpose and what you want to achieve, because there's always retrospective logic. You can always spin a story to make what you're doing, or you decide what you want to do and then you decide why. You create a story around that thing. So depending from where you look at it, each person thinks they are doing the right thing. The question then becomes, where do you stand? And that's the challenge of people who want to go into politics. Where do you stand? How much are you willing to? Because you'll hear counter arguments, for arguments, against arguments, but the question is intrinsically, and so there's hard choices to make. The question of politics is not whether you have money or not, whether you have resources or not, is whether you understand power and the use of power, and the use of the lack of power. So there's a story I keep, if I do a leadership talk, called the Stonecutter.
Yes.
And for me, that's a framing idea. Do you know the story?
So guys, just a quick story of how I met Mr. Wayne. I was at a camp called Adventure into Citizenship. He came through, the story he's talking about, that is what he brought onto us and to me and 49 other learners from different schools within the Western Cape and out of the Western Cape. Yeah.
So the story of Stonecutter is essentially the story of a stonecutter who wants to change the world. So he's busy chopping away at a stone, shaping it. And he sees somebody going past. And so you can Google the story. He sees somebody going past who's far more powerful than the head of the village. And he says, I wish I could be him. Look how powerful that person is. The story comes back a loop. And eventually he becomes the wind. And eventually becomes a stone in his story of changing different roles. Because as he wishes for something, he becomes it. And eventually he becomes a stone, because a stone can't be moved. It's because he was the wind before, and then a stone can't be moved. And then comes a stone cutter and starts chipping away. So that's why I come back to my initial story, was that the role or the job that I had planned for myself is not the one I'm doing. Because the big thing was, I didn't say I want to be a politician. I could have. There's posters somewhere where I was running for council when I was 21 or 22. I could have been an MPL at a very young age. But the question was, I had to ask myself, if I go into this space, am I able to achieve what I had set out to do? So one of the things is, if you become a politician, you make decisions, you think. But if you're sitting in National Assembly, you're part of 400 people, can you really make a change? There's a type of change you can make, but you need to. So sometimes somebody in the community feeding people is making a bigger difference
than you sitting in the National Assembly.
Than an MP sitting in the National Assembly. So the question is, what is my skill set? What's my purpose? And why am I doing this? So I always say, go back to your why. If you know your why, so even when you step into that MP role, you go there with a different mindset. If you're going in there with the mindset of being a politician, you often find, it's like I always speak to people and say, they started like the origination story. I'm frustrated about something that's happening. I want to make a difference. I need to be a politician. They become a politician because that's where they think they're going to make the change. And then that very famous Cape Town song by Salome, then it becomes complicated.
Salome.
It's complicated because now you start speaking about the IDP and all of these different tools and budgeting mechanisms. And all you wanted to do was make sure, for example, young people have access to the pool. And now you've been drawn into, you've got a different language, you've got to navigate. So you've got to be intentional about your purpose. And that's why I say first start with your purpose and then decide what you want to do. Or follow the journey that life will set out if you say, this is where what I want to do. Because it might be a politician, but you could do that as well as a church leader because we also measure success by, so I find lots of young people who want to become politicians, they don't feel they're doing anything and they focus more on becoming a politician than changing the things that was driving them to be a politician.
Wow. I feel like you've actually answered my questions now. Answered perfectly. So
I
now,
hope the viewers can understand because I know I'm very difficult to understand sometimes.
Yeah, but no, it's great. Otherwise, I'm starting to wrap up now. And to wrap up, I actually only have 2 more questions. I think the last one is not really a question. It's just something I would actually like you to leave with the viewers and the younger people. So then, let me call this my last question. And then what I will say at the end, or what you will say at the end, will just basically be something you'll be saying to the people that is viewing or that is watching us. So like, my last question is, where do you plan to go from here?
It's a good question. So I spoke about the why, your purpose, and Simon Sinek, and if you follow Simon Sinek, there's short videos, long videos on purpose and why. And there's even tools that he's designed which allows people, and you can self-implement on your why and your purpose. So for me, what you're asking is not a why question. It's a how and a what question. And so the how and the what, I'm less committed to that.
Okay.
I'm more committed to the why. And again, I'll come back to my origination story. I want a fairer world. I want a better world. Or I want to leave the world fairer and better. So I will continue pursuing that as my journey. How and what, I'm not particularly sure for now. But, my major objectives is I want my kids to graduate. I want them to have a good life. So for me, the first thing is, I'm a father. I want to tend my flock. I mean, one of the big journeys I've been over the past 2 years after I almost died with COVID was to say, I've got to be more intentional in my children's lives because they stand on the shoulder of giants. So I'm trying to be a good father. That's my first big thing. I want to be a better father, better husband. Because they will go out. I don't want them to have the same backstory as I had about my parents. They've done great work, but they also had their traumas that they left me. So my first major thing is to do that. And then professionally, to constantly show up for the underdog, for the voiceless, and to think differently. I always like the idea when I speak to people, they come back and say, oh, I never thought of that way. And that's what I constantly push. How can, if I see something, okay, that's the narrative, that's the story, but can we look at it in a different way? And can I help people look at that same thing in a different way? So that's I want to constantly challenge people. I want to leave the world a better place. So I can't say what my next gig will be. Mm-hmm. For now, I'm happy where I'm at. And I think I'm impacting lives where I'm at. But if life throws me a different challenge, I will take it up.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that question as well. I mean, I don't think there was a better way of answering it. You've given us what we were looking for. So now, to finish or to end, our viewers will, throughout the video, our viewers will see that, no, you've actually given them all the tools, everything they need, because you outlined the challenges you faced, how you overcame them, what you do now, and you also inspire them through, some good life examples. And you also changed my perspective on how I actually saw politics, the world of politics. So now, maybe to end, would you maybe just mind giving a word of an encouragement to a person who will be sitting behind their phones or behind the TV, watching this video, and have maybe lost hope? They don't have faith. They have also lost faith. They are also don't even know what their gifts are. So, what word of encouragement would you give to these people? What can they do, to help themselves get where they want to be?
So, I've got a 17-year-old daughter now. This is the conversation we had on Sunday. Be kind to yourself. It's okay to fail, because in failing you learn. So be kind to yourself. It's okay not to get it right. You don't have to have all the answers now. Don't let anybody make you think that you... Because I was having this conversation with my daughter, and she's going into matric now. And she's like, oh, my matric determines the rest of my life. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It's important, and you must put the effort into it. But I've seen in my own life, I've got, for example, I'll give you an example. There's a friend of mine, now a friend that I communicate with. When we were in high school, he was the drug lord's enforcer at school. No, it's a true story. He was, because the drug lord's daughter was also at school. He was a protection. And me and him used to clash because I was head boy. I put him in...
Put him in a cell
jail, but
yeah.
But I mean, it ended up where he threatened me with a knife in the pool room in the area. But now he's a pastor, and we have a connected relationship where he's got he has a scholarship at our old school, and he's invested in the community, and he sits on boards for the old age home. So where you at is not where you'll end. Find your purpose, be kind to yourself. You will make mistakes. You might get things wrong, but always have hope and find hope in that tomorrow's a new day. There is purpose in your life. And that's why I say, have the time and spend the time. It might take you years to find your purpose, but find your purpose, because then you'll truly be happy. If you just chase the what, I want to be a politician, then what happens is, if you don't get that, you'll be deeply unhappy. But in the process of chasing that what and how, you will forget about your why. You'll forget about your purpose. So find your purpose. And it might not be clear. And you need to stand in grace for yourself and say, I'm still thinking about what really motivates me. Why do I wake up in the morning? What is my earliest memories of having purpose? So when I go to that 9-year-old, that 9-year-old story,
He was thrown out of the pool because he didn't belong there.
Because he didn't belong there, because he wasn't the right color. That story is why I wake up in the morning. I'm trying to heal that person. So whatever I do, whether it's, so I can be flipping burgers at Burger King, but I'm going to do it with purpose, because that meal that I'm serving might feed somebody who needs that at that particular moment. In everything you do, you can find purpose. So my father was a pastor, and one of the things there was a story he would tell. I don't know if you know the word pupo. You know what the word pupo is? Do you know what the word pupo is?
I don't know what's a pupo. Unfortunately, guys, I don't.
So basically, it's the bum. Okay, let's keep it as clean as it. But it's the physical part where shit comes out. Okay. And it was a pastoral story he used to tell. He says, you should tell the story often. And he said, the body was fighting about who was the most important. And the brain said, I think. The mouth said, I bring nutrition. The nose says, I breathe. The lung says, I process. Each body part believed they were the most powerful and most valuable to the body. And they were arrogant about it. And then the pupo said, I'm the most important part. And they all laughed. They all laughed. They all laughed and said, no, you can't be. You're not that important. And then the pupo got offended.
I mean,
he was like, guys, we all dancing here.
Yeah.
Why are you laughing at me? Because it was a universal, not you. We all decided it's not you. So then the pupo said, okay, I'm going to stop doing what I do. And let's see how this ends. I'm telling the story in my own way, but my father told it in a funnier way. And so for a week went by, 2 weeks went by, and you can imagine now things start shutting down. Other people can't do what they need to do. So even the least in our community and society, what we believe is the least, all has purpose. Don't ever feel, because I know there's a lot of this thing called imposter syndrome, where people feel we're chasing things, we're chasing titles, you'll find your purpose, and you are as important as anybody else. So give yourself grace, be kind to yourself, and really find what drives you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wayne. Beautifully said. Last words to you guys. Your current situation is not your destiny. Work hard on your dreams. Thank you so much for having us, Mr. Wayne. Shout out to FNF. Shout out to MJ Pro Studio. Shout out to my brothers behind the camera, Michael, Onyx, and Samuel. God bless. And do not forget to comment, like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. God bless.